Welcome, everybody, to another adventure in books with Source Booksellers. We are so delighted this evening to have a wonderful writer with us this evening, and Allison's going to tell you all about that. I just want you to know that we are Source Booksellers, and we are an independent bookstore specializing in nonfiction books. We cover lots of categories of health and well-being, history and culture, the arts, travel writing, books by and about women, economics and business and politics. So we have lots of categories that we cover in our inventory at Source Booksellers. This book tonight is really great because it's right on time with books by and about women and health and well-being from a recreational point of view and writing. So we just welcome you to this evening, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy our author, and come and visit us at Source Booksellers in Midtown Detroit. Allison, tell us about our author.
Well, first, I'm going to say that we've been loving this book since it was released. When I first saw a copy of it before it came out, I just fell in love with the image on the front. But then I looked inside and I said, oh my gosh, there are a few people that we know. Carolyn Finney did a wonderful event with us for her book, White Spaces, Black Faces.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kept looking, and the Penniman sisters have such a relationship with the Detroit Food Security Network here that the connections just kept going and the inspirations kept going. So thank you so much for editing this edition. And I'm going to just tell everyone a little bit about you. So we have Erin Sharkey. She's a writer, an arts and abolition organizer, a cultural worker, and film producer. Currently in living in Minneapolis, but in a dreamier place right now.
Yes,
the
I'll tell you more about
that. With help me to say it right,
Janada
Pettis, of the experimental arts collective called Free Black Dirt. And there's just a book that the co-founder released that just came out recently called The Grand.
Could we please give the police departments to the grandmothers?
Yes, please give the police department to the granddaughters. And we have grandmothers. And we have copies. It is a delightful book. It's a picture book, everyone. Oh, so back to Erin. She was awarded the Black Seed Fellowship from Black Visions and Headwaters Foundation. Holds an MFA of creative writing, and you can definitely see that she's excellent at this, from Hamlin University, and teaching, currently teaching in the Minnesota Prison Writing Project.
Yes.
And so today we're talking about A Darker Wilderness, Black nature writing from soil to stars. And my first question was, when you started this project, did you start it as a book, or did it come together and it had to be a book?
Yeah, I did have a vision for a book. It sort of was this perfect culmination moment where I had a press locally in Minnesota who was interested in talking with me about a book. And I also had just started teaching a nature writing class with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop at Faribault Correctional, which is a facility here in Minnesota, the largest one in the state. And I also had a residency in the Anderson Library at the University of Minnesota, which houses the Givens Collection of African American History and Memory. And it just felt like a perfect storm of like the amazing writing that I was witnessing my students produce in this nature writing class, and the ways that they were approaching the idea of nature was really expanding for me, expansive for me. I really felt like my own definitions of nature were really growing, and the boundaries of nature were really falling. They were seeing nature, not just its importance in their childhoods and in their boyhoods, but also in their everyday lives, which nature isn't a thing that I imagine happening in prison. But they were really like craning their necks to look out their window to see how the clouds were telling them about the weather, about the change of time. They were marking the ways that the ducks in the yard were acting differently today than yesterday. They were thinking about the yellow jackets that were bouncing off the windows of our classroom. And that felt like if they could find the liberatory, amazing connection with nature in such an oppressive place, I thought that could be a central theme in a book. And then the archive also was so, I started out reading some narratives of formerly enslaved people that were taken during the Federal Works Commission. And they actually were from an area of Mississippi where my family's from. And I was excited to read them. And I'd never read a firsthand account of enslavement before. And in the very first narrative, the woman being recorded was talking about how much pride that their family had in the garden. And to be honest, I'd never thought about the garden as a different place on a plantation than the fields. And it was liberating for me to think that there was an opportunity for pride and for autonomy in such an oppressive system. And so to hear someone talk about how proud they were of their auntie's terrapin stew, or how great the tomatoes were in the garden, it just made me think, oh, the garden is actually, maybe that's a liberatory place. So I started looking at garden club rolls from the 1940s, which is where I found this image that's on the cover. I was going through pictures of the images of women and the things that they were making and growing. And I just love the look on her face. She's not begging for approval. She's just presenting straight. Yeah, she's so beautiful. And I also got to I read some cookbooks, I read some farmers' almanacs, and I got really inspired, particularly learning about Benjamin Banneker and his work. And so those were the seeds of the project. It really came together. And some anthologies are assemblies of previously published work. This collection, the vast majority of this work in the book is brand new in the world. Laurette Savoy revisited an earlier essay that she wrote in her book Trace, where she spent time thinking about the legacy of racist place names. And she felt like it had been 10 years or so since she drafted that, and so much had happened because of the brutal murder of George Floyd and the uprising of people and the response to that violence, that communities were now contending with and renaming places. And so she revised that chapter, she added on to it. So, but besides that, all the rest of them are brand new. And so it was really exciting to start from like the seed of an idea. And I had a dream list of writers. You'll see that many of the writers in the collection are maybe primarily poets. And I adore what poets do in long form. I just feel like there's something like really magical about it.
Did you already
ahead.
know Michael Kibler-Diggs? Did you already know?
I did. Yeah, he is a dear friend of mine, and we're in a writing community together here in Minnesota. And he actually wrote a poem several years ago about going fishing with his grandfather. And I said, Michael, that's an essay. Please write that essay. And for most of the writers in the collection, I was just a big fan of their work, or a big fan of them personally and of their work. And so I reached out and I said, this is a little bit I know, and I think that you can really, hit this topic out of the park. And so it was really miraculous to watch them come to be, to start for little tiny ideas. I sent them each a few archival objects to think about, to like, oh, does this make you excited? Is this like a spark for you? And then worked with them to develop the essays to the versions that are in the book.
Wow. So I only know Michael from poetry, but I was so excited.
Okay.
I was so excited just to read, something else,
Yeah.
maybe just some prose. So
yeah, and he's working on his second book is a book of prose about swimming and his body in water, and I'm really excited for that. Look out for that in the next couple of years.
do I look
But
excited
the
too?
other, yes,
Okay.
the other thing that's exciting about his entry is that for each of the essays in the collection are anchored by an archival object or in conversation with an object. I really wanted to use those objects to emphasize that Black folks have had a relationship with nature since before the inception of this country, and that and often that relationship is one of stewardship, of really care, and of stewarding of nature. And so I wanted there to be archival objects throughout the book. In the case of Michael Cleaver Diggs, he was able to connect with a family member who had some of his grandfather's prized possessions in their family collection, and was able, through very many communications, convince that relative to mail his grandfather's tackle box and fishing lures to Minnesota. So we were able to archive them for the very first time. So that those materials are now in a digital form that other folks can interact with and think of interact with the power of the archive that way. So I was really proud of being able to issue one more object into the archive.
Awesome. So now this archive, it's digital.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, mm-hmm. So
Is it-
I was in a physical collection, but one of the projects of the University of Minnesota and the Anderson Library is a project called Umbra Search, which is a digital aggregate. So it brings together digital objects from collections across the country, small ones, private ones, school, university ones, statewide ones. So you can actually go there and search topics that you're interested in, and it will bring you to the collection that it's housed in. So many of the objects in this book are featured in the Umbra Search collection, but they are owned by University of Virginia or by Temple University. Depends on the object.
I just want to tell people they could go see it.
Yes, check it
There's
out.
more to
It's
this
a really
book.
good tool. Yes, and there's more information about it in the book.
Did you find tools that were handmade, that people had made their own
Mhm.
tools for their gardening, or really the non-essential things that they could do for themselves, like having their own garden? That's such a history. And when people came from the south to the north, what they did is have gardens in their backyards, and
Exactly. Yeah.
grew
Yeah.
their own food that way because the habit was there. And I just wonder, has been the research you found that some of them even made their own tools or created a tool that was useful for them?
Sure. Yeah, there are definitely objects like that in the Umbra Search collection. I'd encourage folks to explore it. Some memorable tools that I found in the collection, there's like hand hewn divining rods to find water, those are really beautiful sticks to find in the collection. Also like handmade hairbrushes, hair combs, that sort of thing. At one point I was looking for recipes for hair products, which there are a few in the collection that you should check out. Yeah, it is just the tip of the iceberg. And I think that when you can find the sort of objects that interest you, it tells you where they have the physical objects, and they are often many more objects there that aren't digitized. So it could encourage you to go to the collection that's near to you, or one that houses something that's of interest to you. There's the tackle box. There it
It's
is.
also
Isn't it
in the book.
beautiful?
Yes, but I love that it's archived and it's a real thing.
Yes, right.
Yeah, yep, me too. It feels really special.
So I'm really excited that this book has a Detroit connection, and that you were really able to kind of bring it to us. And I'm so thankful to everybody that had a hand in this for us today.
It was a group effort.
Yes. And so
Sure.
we did, sort of talk about this event, like celebrating Earth Day with us, when you're going to focus on the earth, focus on Black nature writing.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I mean, we're celebrating it all. But
Yeah.
do you think this is a good time for us to talk a little bit about it?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it for sure. Do you want me to introduce Ronald and Ronald's essay?
I can
Does that feel
read.
like
I can
the right
read.
time?
Let me see.
His bio is in the very back
I got
of
it.
the book.
I'm reading
Okay,
it.
cool.
Okay.
Sweet.
Ronald L. Greer II, pronouns he and him, is a multi-genre writer and poet whose poems and stories have appeared in Doors Adjacent, Night Colors, and Drop a Kite, among others. He is a 2019 Paula J.
Caligari.
Broadside Award winner and is co-editor of the forthcoming anthology, America
Precariat.
Greer spent his formative years in Detroit. What up, Doe? Okay. Nourishing his grandfather's urban gardens.
Awesome.
And
well, I'm so sorry, go ahead.
there were many gardens in the city, and there was a group, and they were called Gardening Angels. And some of them would have gardens in the front lawn.
And the other thing to remember is that Detroit had the only urban 4-H club program in the city of Detroit.
Oh, cool.
So I just love all these connections. And we sometimes, I guess, we don't think much about gardening, but it's really been a thread that's run all the way through the history of Black people in Detroit. And I would say others too, because we brought the habit of having a garden and chickens as we came up from the South. And in Detroit, you can still have a chicken or two, can't you?
I think
it's still,
I'm not sure.
I think it's still okay. And so that's really bringing people in touch with their own food source, which we talk about a lot now, given the corporate farms and all of that, early on, people were sensitive about having access to their own food in their own way. So I think that this book that we're talking about of your editing today is perfect for Earth Day. We tend to think that things are far away from us, some of these days that are named, but they're right in our backyard and in our in our history and our ancestry that's current. So I too am very appreciative of having this book for now. So
Thank you. So Ronald Greer is a writer who is part of Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. He wrote a very short piece, a page long, that I heard him read just before the pandemic about his grandfather's garden. And it was just a gorgeous nugget. And I thought, maybe we could do it. Like, can we expand this one page into a 25-page essay for the collection? And I asked him if he could do it, and he said he would do it. And then we got into the pandemic, and I think there isn't a worse place to be in the pandemic than the prison. It was a really violent place to be. Lots of death in Minnesota inside of prisons. And I know Ronald had COVID at one point and was living on a cot in a gym with other sick people. And So it's kind of a miraculous feat that he was able to complete this gorgeous essay. And I was so lucky to get permission from the Department of Corrections to visit him on publication day. And so I got to share with him the reviews for the book, and especially a review that said his essay is the best of the collection. And I believe that it is just really gorgeous. It's been such a gorgeous gift to us. So I was hoping that he could join us. But because of the rules of the Department of Corrections, that's not possible. But we were able to, with help of several people from Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, get a recording of him. So actually yesterday, the director of Prison Writers drove 3 hours north and 3 hours back to get a physical copy of this for us. So I'm going to play a video of Ronald reading from his essay, The Magic Alley.
Oh, we get to
Oh,
meet
good.
him.
That's good. Mhm.
Yeah, you'll get to see him. Let me share my screen.
Hello, my name is Ronald Greer, and I will be reading an excerpt out of my personal essay called Magic Alley that is a part of this book, A Darker Wilderness, edited by Erin Sharkey. By the time I entered my high school years, I witnessed my share of what the alley had to offer. Some things horrific, others morbidly beautiful, and some things fantastically unbelievable. Though instead of thinking of the alley as magical, I began to look at it through the lens of a growing young man. It was just an alley that held the troubles of most inner cities. Just another area flooded with drugs, violence, and buildings that could no longer bear the weight of the people who entered them. Those buildings no longer symbolized mystical, powerful places, but rather crumbling structures that were smeared with the human stain. What once served as my playground became a few abandoned houses, garages, and apartment buildings that grew a reputation of housing mental and physical torture. Astoundingly, I never felt out of place in those structures. They felt as much as home as my grandparents' front porch. No matter how bleak or deadly these places appeared, I could walk in their murky hallways as easy as I could walk through air. Next door to Harvey's home, where we played basketball, was a very large house that existed without a family for many years. The family moved away when I was 11 or 12, and like every other abandoned structure I walked past, it held intrigue in the story of why it died. I was an explorer, and even though I didn't have my crew with me, I still wanted to know what caused these kingdoms to fall, their stories. In a sense, even as a teenager, I was still searching for magic in the alley. I entered the large house with no other reason than to climb to his attic and look out over the once lively lands that had slowly died off. If my imagination still possessed the ability to paint phantasm over urban blight, I would have said that the once powerful glowing kingdom slowly died from the effects of a white plague. But at that time, my imagination did not allow me to create that storyline. Though I was unaware of it, my imagination had experienced a deadening process, and the kingdoms were losing their color, paling compared to their previous moments of golden grandeur. The colors were no longer vibrant, but rather a faint hue of themselves. The life had been drained from the environment and my mind. I no longer felt like a protector or an explorer, just a teenager in a world surrounded by drugs. I did not partake, and I did not judge the people who used them. I merely watched those people's turmoil, their daily toil to find a way to procure their customary fix. Then, as heroin was replaced in the onslaught of the crack epidemic, the character of people worsened, and the alley became smothered by more tragedy and lush piles of green growth. Backyards consumed by plants became hiding spots for shadows. At night, through the darkness, the flame of a lighter shone momentarily bright. The alley had become overgrown, but at least one area remained cared for, and when passerby walked along this small plot of land, merely the width of 2 city houses, they could not ignore the colors it emitted. The old man sitting on a rusted metal milk crate, or myself. On this small plot of reclaimed inner city land, using our own 2 hands, my grandfather and I tilled the dirt and planted vegetables. And when the small garden green shoots of produce cracked the earth and grew green and edible, we shared the food with the neighborhood. Mrs. Robinson, a heavy-set, late middle-aged woman who walked with the cane and the wattle, accepted our vegetables, and in return paid us in thank yous. She never failed to give me a Snickers candy bar after I handed her a head of cabbage. When I wasn't in the garden with my grandfather, I was either playing basketball at Harvey's or relaxing on my grandparents' porch. Though my imagination was much less active and I had found very little to explore, I still found the people and surrounding area of the Magic Alley satisfying. The one place I did need to explore was the large house. With the lack of a family, it had quickly fallen to waste. Even when a family lived there, the house had already succumbed to nature's reclaiming. The backyard was overgrown with prickly weeds and small leafy shrubs and resembled a wildlife reserve more than a backyard. I remembered imagining as a child that there were bear traps or landmines back there. I'm pretty sure as I made my way from one border to the other that I looked like a plain fool tippy-toeing through the backyard like a cartoon jewelry thief. Soon after the house became abandoned without a family, the plants grew onto and into the house and reclaimed the structure for themselves. Most of the time that the house sat abandoned, community children played in it as I had played in other houses a few years back, and drug dealers here hid guns and drugs in his backyard for us. Addicts squatted, finding a place to rest. No one seemed to care that it was overrun by verdant plant life. Then, in the early 90s, a tragedy occurred in the large house, in the large abandoned house. And most of the time, people who knew about it decided not to enter the house anymore. No one played, squatted, or practiced any form of magic behind the house's walls. I was either never completely told what happened, or I don't want to recall what happened in the large house. I only know of the solemn, angry temperament people spoke through when the story was brought up. The story was so inhuman that no one wanted to repeat it. So cold-hearted that it could make the cruelest cringe. I can't remember the story, only the community's feeling. If I had to venture a memory, the unspeakable event that occurred in that house involved a young girl. And afterward, the story had the power to deny entrance into the house. I respected my community wishes for as long as I could, but what happened there no longer existed there, and I wanted to explore, if for no other reason than to be alone. When I finally decided to enter the large house, my ascension to the attic was arduous. The front walkway was broken into torso-sized blocks. The roots from trees fought their way through the concrete, compromising its structural stability along with the rest of the house and the community. The front porch twisted into an entanglement of early century colonial architecture and lush wildlife with the symbolic warning, if you enter, you may not exit. The porch moaned as I stepped on it. The wood felt moist under my feet and every plank crumbled as the vegetation that grew from it tried to capture me for my invasion. I did not attempt to use the backyard. My muscle memory and imagination told me that there were still bear traps and landmines there. But really, it would not have been possible to fight through the plants without a machete. I was standing in the doorway after I made it through the plants of the porch. The front door had been removed along with every window, some of the walls, and the living room floor. Someone else had recently entered the house and had stripped it for its copper pipes, sinks, woodwork, and stained glass. I like to think that they stripped it to leave it naked for the world to see, exposed to the elements without any protection, making the house suffer the same pains it had inflicted to others. As I walked up the crumbling stairs, I could see directly into the basement. A small pond had formed and dark green moss, or maybe thickened mold, had lined the walls. The house was so uncared for that only the growing plants gave it any attention. If it weren't for the brick structure, nature could have taken advantage of the house's frailty and leveled it with the gust of wind, flattened it to a pile of bad memories. The plants had waited many years for people to stay away so they could consume the evils of the house and cleanse it in the only manner that only nature knew how. Along the inside of the house, vines and moss lined the walls, and squirrels, raccoons, or possums could be heard scurrying away when they recognized the human in their midst. For a moment, I considered leaving, certain the rattlesnake that had never been found slithered around in there somewhere, waiting to strike invaders, or that a family of rabid pit bulls lived in the attic and that I would become a fat feast for them. The house was an uncharted forest in our neighborhood. That may have been the only moment I felt unsafe in such houses, the only time I felt danger near me. As I ascended to the attic, weathered and disintegrated, the roof opened to the sky. A structural collapse allowed golden sunlight to paint itself on the puckered walls. Spaces of the room were carpeted with splotches of dark green moss. Sparrows, dark and light brown, fat and agile, darted in and out of the windows. I was afraid I'd be pecked to death, that they understood I did not belong in their aviary. Then, for a moment, the house went dead silent. There were no animals scurrying about, and the sparrows flew out of earshot. In the silence, the room was magical, more magical than my imagination or words could create. I took delicate steps toward a broken window and looked out over the magic alley, viewing it from this perspective for the first time. It served as an equator, a visible but unseen line that separated rows of houses, a calm, lazy river, sullen, violent, and providing. While there, looking out the window, I became one of the faces that peer from the edges of weathered window panes, seeming to play a game of hide and seek or peekaboo. And as I looked out the window, my view of the world was changing. I no longer thought of the animals or people of the alley as magical or as beings with unrivaled powers. I only saw animals and people. The pit bulls were nothing more than a backyard full of dogs. Crackhead Kay no longer held my fascination. She was transformed to a dead junkie. I still looked at the winos the same, people standing in circles talking to another group of people through the distorted view of a wild Irish rose bottle. But as I looked out the window, I could see the ever-prevailing fortitude of goodness and calmer of calamity, a true force of protective magic. From the window, I could see my grandfather, Charlie Ramsey, tend to one of our gardens. In that moment, I reflected that all my protections came from his magical power instead of my own. Since before I remember having a memory, my grandfather and I had grown and given produce to people. Next to a crack house, my grandfather and I planted and cultivated an urban garden that fed the neighborhood. We gave lima beans, green peas, tomatoes, and turnip greens to church ladies whose sons were dope dealers and whose aunts and uncles were drug addicts. In his own way, my grandfather worked magic on those people. They guarded me from the wicked magic that should have consumed me. Mr. Ramsey's boy is what they called me, as if I didn't have my own name. I feel because of my grandfather's magic, I was immune to the fate that befell occupants of the alley. But I was still witness to its effects. The shells of people left drained from wicked magic. Have you ever seen a ghost bleed? I have. He walked past me while I played basketball. Despite his sun-blackened skin, he was pale-faced and hollow, moaning a dreadful sound while blood trickled from his head. I didn't reach out to help or ask the injured man if he was okay. I recognize him as one of the people who has suffered in war, someone the Magic Alley has saved his worst part for to be released in dark vengeance. Once the golden, youthful magic from the alley was drained, there were no imaginative moments of me being a savior or some kind of imperial guard, but rather moments of being a gladiator, another body in a fight with time and misfortune. All the fun it provided me took people's appearances, souls, or both, leaving nothing but ghosts of men and women. But in this story, in this world, my grandfather exists and burns brightly, always being reborn from the ashes. He survived and overcame everything between the Great Depression and the crack era, from rural Mississippi to inner city Michigan, and it awes me to believe that a regular human could endure half of that. He was magical. And when the world and people around him were withering away or growing into some monstrosity, he used vegetable gardens to replenish the people as well as the land. He possessed the power to see the contents in people instead of the costumes they wore. I want to believe that all mankind could be the same as him, but they are not. So how could he not be magical? And that alley, with all its lurking dangers, were no match for him or his metal rake, garden hoe, and seeds. His magic protected me at the times I thought I was fantastic. It was not me, but the blanket of comfort and compassion that an old, weary king has on his lands, and especially his kin.
I just want to ask you, you teach writing to the people who are incarcerated. How stunned are you that their imagination is so rich?
I mean, I am moved all the time by the amazing art that they're making, but I don't underestimate them anymore. They have so much capacity for crafting just really gorgeous things. I mean, I think it's a feat to have any kind of imagination under those oppressive circumstances and in those places where things are really drab. And so, but I really have found some amazing writing community there of people who are making really brave work, who are have access to descriptive qualities and lyric qualities that are able to create just beautiful pieces of art out of sometimes very hard circumstances. And they're writing about all different things. They're writing about their childhoods, they're writing about their favorite uncle, they're writing about their day, working in the kitchen or whatever their job is. Just a whole range of things.
Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised by them doing that, but what I'm getting at is that your capacity to teach them must be extraordinary, because it takes a personal touch, I'm sure, to bring that possibility out of people and to bring that imagination. I could hear it in his words and wondering, how did you guide that kind of imagination?
Yeah.
It's a compliment to you in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Well, I am not the only person who's been an educator in that space. So I really credit the other educators with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. And Ronald's been really working hard for many years on this work. And we find that the writers in our program, because they are not taking a class for credit, which is very important. And there are lots of folks pursuing degrees inside and stuff like that. But the group of writers who are part of our classes are using their little free time to be part of a writing community, and they meet with each other, they encourage and teach each other. And so I think I'm an okay teacher, and I really get excited when students are winning, and really like when students are achieving what they're hoping to achieve in their description or in their meaning making or their reflection of their life. But yeah, it's a whole community of people, and many of their best teachers, I think, are each other, are other members of their writing community inside. And we're really lucky. Yeah, we're really lucky in Minnesota because we've been doing this work now with prison writers for 10 or 11 years. And we have our first students coming home. And so we're really working hard to create bridges for folks to come home and to be part of communing in really meaningful ways, because the literary community in Minnesota, we're so lucky to have these folks. So yeah, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
Let's talk about Carolyn Finney's introduction.
Yes.
Let's do it. Sure. Yeah. Carolyn, what a sweet, a sweet human Carolyn Finney is. And I was so inspired by her work, Black Faces, White Spaces, and a few other collections, Camille Dungy's work in Color of Nature. There were a few books that were inspiring to me, and Carolyn's was one of them. And I reached out to her one of the very first people I reached out to be part of the book. And we talked about a lot of options, and we're writing and sending work back to each other and having lots of conversations. We felt like in the end, that having her start us off in this conversation that's happening in this book would be the best way for it to fit and for us to work together. So she's reflecting on her own experience with her parents' work in lovingly stewarding land for her whole life, much of their lives, and that land is not land they own, and so there's sort of a real violent separation from a sacred place for them, and so it was holding all the themes of the whole collection that I really wanted folks to have access to. And so I felt so lucky and that she's so generous with us, and what a gift. I'm excited to be in further conversation with Carolyn, for sure.
Yeah.
I think for us, speaking of Carolyn, I think in a way she helped us have the glue to stick our category together that we call sustainability and ecology, because she brought so much to us. It was very early on across the street. That her book came out and we learned about it and were able to bring her in. But it gave us a pathway to seek other writers and naturists, I guess you might call them, naturalists, in this whole field of ecology and sustainability, which is one of our major categories in the store.
Yeah.
So yours is in there too.
Okay, so
So I can't wait to see it
after her
in that
introduction,
section.
after her introduction, I'll tell you my
Mhm.
favorite page is
Tell
19.
me.
19.
Page 19. Let me see.
Because I believe you were saying that nature writing
Mhm.
is rooted in the American experiment. What?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I was like, where is that page? It's in the introduction. Um, so I think that it's important to remember that nature isn't neutral, that nature is a political space, and it's important for us to remember that power structures and policy impacts our personal relationships with place and with nature in particular. And so it's no accident, it's by design that when you ask most folks, like, what is nature? They talk about, making sure you have the right like Patagonia gear and that like you climb a mountain and you're like pushing your body to the limits and you may go somewhere no one has gone before. And I think that that's such a reductive and narrow view of nature. And I think that it's valuable for us to think about the ways in which we have some work to do to unpack the violence of redlining, of racial covenants and deeds, of sundowner towns, of Jim Crow laws, of slavery that is still persistent in our relationships. So the fact that Black folks have had to navigate travel in this country using the Green Book or using a network of connections impacts our connection to nature and how much comfort or safety or access or competence we feel in nature. And so there are several writers in the collection speaking directly to that. Glenn Pogue, who wrote the essay about the 4th of July. Her mother is an innkeeper. She has had inns in the Northeast for many years. She was featured on a Oprah Winfrey Network show about her inn before the pandemic. I don't know when it was, many years ago. So I was so excited for Glenn to reflect on the history of Black travel and so she looked at an inn that was in Martha's Vineyard, which is a historically important place for Black travel. And so each of the essays in the collection sort of intersect with this idea of the American question. Like, have we achieved freedom and equality? Is this the land that it was set out to be, of opportunity, of equality? And when it's failing, like whose back is it failing on? Who's doing the work to help us to have a better union? So I think the themes of liberation are through all the essays in the collection. I think are sort of touching on that. And I wanted them not to all be like pro nature, because nature is complicated and some of us feel real fear in nature. I know as a big person, as a fat person, and as someone who has had asthma my whole life, I came into the world wheezing. There are many times I've been in nature, I felt like antagonistic with nature because my body is itching and I'm wheezing and I'm not sure about my ability to do things. And I'm contending with that image of like climbing a mountain and staking your flag, which I think that if there's a benefit in us thinking about nature in our intimate spaces, in our bed, like in this room I'm in right now. Nature is here too, because I am nature and I'm part of nature. And the sun moves across the room and it creates different feelings. And I have a plant in the corner and it's, nature is here and we don't need to go there for nature. Like we can have nature where we are. And, but still, because it's a thing around power it is a thing we can talk about. In Minnesota, I live in a place with abundant green spaces, abundant wilderness. Part of our personality as Minnesotans is that we go up north to the lakes. Minnesota is a place that is full of farms. There's 70,000 farms in the state of Minnesota, but the vast, vast, vast majority of those farms are growing feed for cattle or for animals, or they're growing fuel. So for oil or bio oil, or for high fructose corn syrup or something, but not really the food for people. And so I think as we're like addressing climate issues in this country, looking towards small scale Black and brown and BIPOC and Indigenous farmers in Minnesota are the real examples of the way that stewarding nature can be a relationship it can be thoughtful of the living things there, of the resources, of the water, of the groundwater, of the soil quality. And that's like, it's all of it's all interwoven together. You know, it's all there at the same time. Minnesota, only 25% of Black folks own their homes in Minnesota. And that also means that they don't have the same we don't have the same access to lakefront property in northern Minnesota and all the residual benefits of having time in nature. Many people don't get to see their parents in a canoe or like not working. You know what I mean? Those sort of things have benefits on our physical bodies and our mental health and our outlook and our level of stress and all that stuff. So I wanted it to not feel like a fluffy pro nature book. Like it is, nature is gorgeous and it's integral, but it's also something that is it's important for us to fight for and to think about how we can undo some of the damage done by hateful, racist policy and try not to make the same mistakes.
Yeah. And there's so much, I guess, thinking or narrative around that we don't go into nature, so we don't know it.
Right.
And so, you know, there are efforts like outdoor Afro, let's all go on a hike and things like that. But there are some families that have gardens and they have just spaces that they've carved out. And it could be just mowing their lawn and it being the most beautiful thing they've ever seen. That's an act of being in nature.
Yes. Yes.
You can, because it is. I mean, if you think about so many urban people, you know, like dwellers, people that just live, even to go up north in Michigan, there aren't a lot of us up there, but you know, we could pitch a tent. My husband and I do it all the time, but not in great number because it hasn't been something that we felt we could do or have time to do. Like, okay, I could just stop and jump in a tent and look at the stars.
Right. Or feel safe. Like there are places in greater Minnesota where I don't feel safe because some of the images that I'm seeing on, you know, lawn signs in support of hateful politicians that will not be named. You know, I think that's real. So here, you know, we 2.5 years ago, I with a group of friends took over the stewardship of a retreat center here in Minnesota. It's called Root Springs. We took over 2 years ago in February. And we're really aiming to center LGBTQIA people and BIPOC folks in nature here. So before we even started taking over, we invited a bunch of folks in our community out to the land, and we did an audit together of how was the journey up? Did it feel safe? Like, how could it feel safer? How can we, like, does the land feel good? Would you use this place? Would you come out here? And resounding, folks were so enthusiastic about having access to a place like Root Springs. So we worked really hard with a group of supporters. We raised money really fast. We were able to pay off the land in our first year. So we own it outright, and we will own it and steward it for the long term so that people can continue to be in relationship with this land. And we have a program called Community Supported Retreat, which is similar to like community supported agriculture, where you support a farmer by paying at the beginning of the season, and then you get a box share throughout the year. Community Supported Retreat is a way for folks to invest in themselves and us as a project by prepaying for 5, 10, or 20 nights on the land. And so they will be coming back over and over again. And we've had over 600 folks overnight stays on the land since we took over. And it's been such a joy to feel like we're creating a safe place. We're stewarding a place that is safe for folks to start to grow further their relationship with nature here, and to get confident in the skills of creating, you know, making a campfire or hiking in our woods or wearing snowshoes or canoeing on our lake, sort of thing. And we have a real heart for continuing to do that work and inviting more and more people out to see us here. So if there's any Michigan folks who ever get out this direction, we'd love to host you at Root Springs. We have 3 small cabins on the land, one named for Pauline Murray, one at the high point of our land called Windrise, and one a geodesic dome that we've named in honor of Octavia Butler. And yeah, we are going to continue to invest in the land. I think in the fall we'll have a hot tub, which will be perfectly positioned to look at the stars. We have this gorgeous view. There's a place on the land where you can feel the whole dome of the sky. You can feel the wind, the night sky is on your peripheral vision too. And I was hoping tonight we were going to have a cloudless sky because there's supposed to be a meteor shower over North America tonight. But we're cloudy, so no meteors for us. But yeah, I'm so excited to have this, this relationship with this place, and to know that over time I'll continue to fall in love with it and know it better. And this is our 3rd spring, and everything's emerging from under a huge blanket of snow, and our springs are coming alive and unfreezing. So there's water everywhere, and there were 16 white-tailed deer, like juvenile deer, on the land yesterday, and they were just standing. Like, I think they seemed like had like 12-year-old boy energy. They were very very curious about us and us about them. And
Were they looking?
they were looking at, they really, I think, were trying to eat from our trees. They were trying to get any spring buds or any leftover fruit at the bottom of our orchard. So, but it's their land, so we make room for them.
So on this Earth Day, which is a national and international effort, I think that to tie into that, as African American people, and as those of us who are interested in education and knowing, I want to say a few words about the use of Earth Day from your point of view.
Yeah. Well, Earth Day reminds us that we are part of Earth, and that there's so many things that are teaching us, or like trying to emphasize our nation or our state or our particularities. But the Earth is something we all share, and it's a finite thing. And so we have to protect it. And there's we're getting so many messages about the stress that the Earth is feeling. And so for it to continue to be a place that holds us and provides for us, and that we have to care for it. And it is a reminder that my actions have consequences, all, in places that I don't know, right? Like there's cause and effects that are happening. And so I think that it's important to remember that our care, that our stewardship, that our like thoughtfulness about how we use resources, how we use objects, how we consume food, how we travel, all those things are important to reflect on, and not just on Earth Day or Earth Month, but all year. So it's a nice touch point to come back. And I love that it's in the spring, because there's so many things budding. There's so much possibility. It's a reminder that there's still possibility, that we can work together to come back from the edge of this climate disaster that's happening around us. So, and I found that inspiration in so many books by Black folks, by African Americans. I think about the ways that, Black writers have been talking to us about that for a very long time.
Spring is the perfect beginning of the year.
Yes.
It's really the beginning of the cycle of growth. Not so much
It's
January 1, but really more like the spring equinox.
So before we hop off, I want to thank everyone that's been hanging in there with us. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or we can bring you up so you can ask it yourself. If you don't have a question, we just want to thank you for being here with us.
And hold the earth close to your heart.
One more thing.
Yes, please.
And the wonderful writers. I mean, I don't think we can say enough about the writers. in this book, and the fact that you pulled together and edited this wonderful volume of writing about the beauty that just surrounds us all the time, and the possibilities that the natural world has for us.
And we're going to say our friend Kaya Miles
Yes.
blurbed
Yes.
it.
Yes, you did. Yes, 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 yes.
Yes, I was so lucky. The blurbers in this book are,
Yes.
yes, I felt so honored by all of their
Yes.
words and thoughts. Yeah, I was so glad that Ty said yes, and Ross said yes, and Drew said yes, and Kiesi said yes.
Yeah.
Really lucky.
Mhm.
All of our favorites, really. So
Yes, for sure.
yeah.
Well, I look forward to coming and seeing you in person someday in
I was just going to
Detroit.
say, you're going to have to come over here.
I would love
Same way,
to.
I
I
have to go
haven't
to the
been back in a
retreat.
few years. Yes,
Right,
come this way. I'll
right.
be in Buffalo for much of May, so I'll wave as I fly past,
Okay.
and I'd
Okay.
love to make some time to come and see you out in Detroit sometime.
Right.
Wonderful.
Right. Right.
Wonderful.
Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks so much for
Have
having me.
have a wonderful day tomorrow, and
Thank you.
best wishes for a good effort there at the retreat. So
Thank you. Yeah, I hope the weather's not below 0. That's all we
okay.
want.
We want to remind people.
Oh, we want to remind everybody, our call to action is always that we have a Darker Wilderness in store and online at sourcebooksellersonline.com. And it is not only a delight to read, but it's a delight to reread. And you can get it at other independent bookstores if we're far away.
Yeah.
We're closer to you.
And yes, I think that we did really well really early. So they've done a reprint already. And those are in. So if you were
Good.
struggling to find it, you
Mhm.
can get it now. So
Okay.
get it from your local bookstores.
I love
yes,
it. I
please.
love that it's success.
Yes, me too. There's worse problems to have.
All right. Thank
Yes,
you so
thank
much,
you for making that
Erin.
effort.
All right.
Have a
Great to
joyful
meet you both,
birthday.
and have a good evening.